Welcome back, guys. Thank you for joining me for this encounter. I hope you are well and fit. Today's story was sent to me by a man named Martin. It's about something unbelievable that happened to his grandparents, Smith and Marlene, back in 1972 after a tornado tore through their farm. What happened next, Martin says, changed his family's view of the world forever. Sit back, relax, and let's start it. In the spring of 1972, Smith and Marlene lived a quiet, honest life on a small farm in rural Oklahoma. They didn't have much, but they had enough. Chickens in the coop, a few goats in the field, and rows of vegetables behind the house kept them fed. Smith handled most of the heavy work. Marlene took care of the home and helped where she could. Their barn was old, but it held steady. Smith and his father had built it by hand back in the 1940s. Thick beams, wide doors, and room enough for feed, tools, and shelter during bad weather. Life was simple. They didn't go into town unless they had to. Neighbors minded their own business. You waved when you saw them, but that was about it. Out in those hills, people sometimes said strange things. Stories passed around, figures seen at dusk, odd howls in the woods, things moving that shouldn't be. Every now and then someone would mention something big, walking upright, seen off near the tree line. Smith didn't bother with that kind of talk. He believed in what he could see and fix with his hands. Crops, fences, livestock. That was enough for him. Marlene would sometimes joke, saying, "If there's something out there, it's keeping its distance, and I hope it stays that way." Smith would just grunt and keep working. He wasn't afraid, but he wasn't curious either. They had no warning that spring was about to change their lives forever. That spring, the sky turned wrong. Not just dark, strange. The air went quiet, heavy. Birds stopped singing. Even the goats got restless. Smith noticed it first. He told Marlene to get ready. Within minutes the wind roared in. A tornado touched down just before dusk. There was no time to think. They grabbed what they could and ran to the storm cellar behind the house. They made it just in time. The ground shook. Boards snapped. It sounded like a train driving through their yard. When the storm passed, they waited a while before climbing out. The air smelled like dirt and rain. The yard was torn up, fences down, pieces of the chicken coop scattered across the field, feathers in the trees. The house had taken a hit, roof damage, windows cracked, but it was still standing. The barn, though, was gone, flattened. Nothing but splinters, broken beams and twisted sheet metal. A few fence posts were driven deep into the mud like stakes. Smith just stood there, hands on his hips. No words. Marlene didn't speak either. That barn wasn't just wood and nails. It held everything. Tools, seed, feed, their winter supply of firewood, even extra fencing. It had been their shelter for animals during storms, and a place to work during bad weather. Built by Smith and his father. Years of sweat in those boards. Now it was just rubble. Some of the animals had run off. Others wandered around in shock. A few didn't make it. Smith buried those quietly. They had no insurance for the barn, just the house, and not much savings to speak of. Lumber prices were high, labor was expensive. Rebuilding wasn't going to happen anytime soon. It was a hard blow. No one came running to help. Out here, you were on your own. Smith and Marlene had no choice but to carry on. But something had changed. The land felt different. Watched, almost. They didn't know it yet, but help was coming. From a place they never expected. The morning after the tornado, Smith walked the property with a shovel and a heavy heart. He checked on the animals, made notes on damage, and started cleaning up what he could. That's when he saw the footprints. They were barefoot, huge, at least twice the size of his own, pressed deep into the mud behind the wrecked barn. Smith crouched down and looked closer. 5 toes. Clear arches. No shoe tread, just solid impressions from something heavy. He thought maybe a neighbor was pulling a prank. But who would come all the way out here, barefoot, just to mess with them? He didn't mention it to Marlene right away. The next day, he noticed something else. His hammer and saw, both of which had been buried in debris, were now laid out on the edge of the barn site. Clean, dry, arranged neatly. By the 3rd morning, more tools appeared. His missing wrench set was lined up by size on a clean plank of wood. Smith started watching more closely. That's when he saw the fence wire. It had been loose, torn up by the storm. Now it was retwisted, pulled tight, and looped the way Smith used to do it in his younger days. Then, one morning, they found the lumber. Fresh cut boards, stacked neatly, not far from where the old barn once stood. The ends were clean and even, like they'd been cut with real skill. No nails, no note, just wood. Straight, solid, and ready to use. Marlene stood over it, arms crossed. "Well," she said, "I guess we've got a ghost carpenter." Smith didn't laugh. He was thinking now. Something, or someone, was helping them. But it wasn't a person. No boot prints, no truck tracks. Just those massive bare footprints that kept showing up every morning. Whatever it was, it meant no harm. It was cleaning up, fixing things, quietly, in the night. Smith didn't believe in tall tales, but the evidence was right there in the dirt. Something big was watching over them, and it had already started rebuilding. It was just before dawn when Smith stepped outside. The air was thick with fog, cold and still. He had planned to feed the animals and check on the fence again. But as he rounded the side of the house, he froze. Out near the wrecked barn, something moved, a massive figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, covered in dark hair, was crouched low to the ground. It was placing lumber down, one board at a time, carefully, like it knew exactly what it was doing. Smith didn't breathe. He didn't move. The creature looked up. It didn't run. It didn't growl. It just looked at him, calm, steady. Its eyes were dark but not wild. There was no threat in them, just awareness. Smith stood still. No words, no panic. He didn't reach for the rifle near the door. He didn't call for Marlene. He simply watched. After a few seconds, the creature slowly stood up. Even taller than Smith expected. Shoulders like a bear. Arms long, hands big enough to grip a fence post like a twig. It backed away, slow and quiet. Not afraid, just cautious. It disappeared into the trees without a sound. Smith stood there a while, not sure what to make of it. He wasn't scared, more curious than anything. It hadn't come to hurt anyone. It was working, helping. That night, sitting by the stove, he told Marlene what he saw. "It ain't a ghost," he said, sipping coffee. "And it ain't mean. But it's real. And I think it's trying to help." Marlene didn't say much, just nodded and looked out the window. The next morning, more lumber was stacked, and the tools had been moved again, closer to where the barn used to stand. Smith didn't go looking for the creature, but he knew it was out there, watching, helping in its own way. Not a threat, not a myth. Real, and it had chosen to lend a hand. That week the sounds started. Every night, after dark, Smith and Marlene heard activity out by the barn site. Nothing wild, just steady noises, soft hammering, wood dragging, and the dull thud of something heavy being set into place. No shouting, no engine sounds, just work. By morning, things had changed. One day, a row of support beams was up. The next, a new floor frame had taken shape. Nails were driven straight. Boards were square and level. Whoever was doing it knew how to build. But there were no footprints, no tire tracks, no signs of people or tools. Just progress. Smith didn't chase it down. He let it be. Whoever or whatever it was, it meant no harm. They decided to offer something back. Marlene set out a plate. Homemade bread, a few slices of apple, and some dried corn. She left it near the edge of the woods. By morning, the food was gone. The plate was still there, clean, upright, like someone had taken care not to break it. The next night, they left more, and the barn kept going up. Posts were anchored deeper than Smith could have done by hand. Some beams looked like they'd been carried from farther out in the woods, heavy, straight, freshly cut. Then one night, curiosity got the better of them. Smith turned off all the lights. He and Marlene stood in the dark kitchen, peeking out the window. What they saw confirmed everything. Two massive shapes, moving with slow care, worked side by side, not clumsy, not wild. Focused, placing boards, adjusting angles, tapping beams into place. Like men on a job site. One was taller, broader. The other moved quicker, more precise. Neither spoke. Not a word between them. But they worked in rhythm, like they'd done it before. Smith and Marlene watched until their breath fogged the glass. Then they stepped back, saying nothing. It wasn't just a one-time act of help. These creatures had taken on the rebuild like it was their own. And they were getting it done. Quietly, overnight, with a purpose. It was near sunset. The air was still. Smith walked out carrying a loaf of fresh bread and a small jug of milk. The barn frame was nearly complete now. Solid beams, clean lines, steady work. He stopped in his tracks. A single Bigfoot was there, standing near the frame, one large hand resting on a top beam. It didn't flinch. It didn't hide. Smith stood still, just a few yards away. He slowly crouched, placed the food on the grass, and stepped back. No sudden moves. The Bigfoot looked at him. Not with fear, not with anger, just calm awareness. Then it looked down at the food. Its hands were big, rough, and covered in dark hair. It picked up the bread and the jug with care, like someone used to handling fragile things. Smith didn't say a word. He just nodded, slow and steady. The Bigfoot gave the slightest tilt of its head, and then it turned, walking back toward the trees with long, quiet strides. No crashing through brush, no panic, just gone. From the kitchen window, Marlene had seen it all. She turned from the glass and said, "They're not beasts, Smith. They're people." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That night, the farm was quiet. No hammering, no dragging wood, just stillness. Smith and Marlene sat on the porch for a long time, saying nothing. What happened wasn't scary. It wasn't strange anymore. It just felt right. This creature, this being, had helped them without asking anything in return. It had shown respect, care, purpose, and in return, they gave the only thing they could, kindness. That night, for the first time since the tornado, Smith slept easy. Not because the barn was almost finished, but because something good still lived out there in the woods. Something real. 2 weeks after the tornado, the barn stood tall again. The frame was solid, the walls were straight, doors hung level on hand-carved hinges. It wasn't pretty, but it was better, stronger, smarter in design. The supports were thicker, the roof line was tighter, drainage had been improved. Smith knew what he was looking at. Work done with thought and skill. All he had to do was hang some tools, nail a few signs, and sweep the floor. The heavy lifting was finished. He never saw the Bigfoots again after that last moment by the frame. Then, one morning, the sounds stopped completely. No hammering, no dragging, no distant footsteps. Everything was still. Smith walked out to the barn, half expecting to find someone at work. Instead, he saw something different. Near the door, right in the dirt, sat a perfect circle of smooth river stones. Each one washed clean, placed with care. No tracks led to it, no signs of how it had been done. It was a message, not a warning. A goodbye. Thank you. Smith didn't touch it at first. For days he just looked at it when he passed by, like it was a gravesite or a marker of something sacred. Finally, one morning, he knelt down and chose a single stone. He brought it into the house and set it on the fireplace mantel, right between Marlene's clock and an old photograph of his father. Neither of them spoke about it. They didn't have to. The barn stood, steady and tall, built by something most people didn't believe in. But Smith and Marlene knew better. There was no fear, no mystery left, just a quiet truth. Sometimes help comes from the places no one expects, and sometimes it leaves behind more than just a building. It leaves behind a story, one that's real. A few folks around town noticed the barn had gone back up faster than expected. Thought you were waiting on insurance, one neighbor said. Didn't think you had the money, another added. Smith just gave a half smile. Had help from some hard workers, he said. They didn't ask for payment. That was all he said. Nobody pushed. People in those parts didn't ask too many questions if you didn't offer details. Especially not Smith. He wasn't the type to make things up. At the diner, one old man mumbled about seeing something big move along the ridge that same week. Tall. Nobody laughed. But nobody followed up either. Marlene never told the full story outside the family. She'd just say, "The Lord sends help in all kinds of ways," and leave it at that. Martin Smith and Marlene's grandson says that the stone from the river circle still sits on their fireplace mantel today, right where Smith put it. Still smooth, still clean. Not a trophy, not a relic. Just a quiet reminder that what really happened that spring didn't need proving. It just needed remembering. Martin told me this story straight. No drama, no guessing. He believes what his grandparents saw, and I believe him. Help doesn't always look how we expect. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's massive. But it shows up. Thanks for listening. If this story spoke to you, subscribe for more true encounters. Until next time, stay safe and keep watch in the woods.